Picture this: a woman sitting in her Montecito mansion, phone pressed against her ear, voice tight with fury as she tells her legal team to prepare for war. Not against a tabloid, not against a reporter, against the future King of England himself. That's exactly where Meghan Markle found herself when whispers started floating through palace corridors about her Duchess title. The one thing she'd built her entire post-royal identity around was suddenly hanging by a thread, and she wasn't about to let it slip away quietly. Today, we're diving into one of the most explosive confrontations between the Sussexes and the palace since they packed their bags and left royal life behind. This isn't just about a title or some ceremonial nonsense. This is about power, identity, and a woman who believed she'd earned something the monarchy was now threatening to take away. The rumors started small, the way these things always do. People inside the institution were talking, and what they were saying was enough to send shockwaves through Meghan and Harry's carefully constructed California life. According to multiple insiders, serious discussions were happening behind palace walls about stripping the Sussexes of their titles. Not just Meghan's Duchess of Sussex title, but Harry's too. Even little Lilibet's courtesy title was being tossed around in meetings. When Meghan got wind of it, she didn't just roll her eyes and move on. She went into full-blown crisis mode. Accounts from journalists and palace insiders reveal that Meghan immediately started calling lawyers, demanding meetings, and making it crystal clear she wasn't going down without a fight. Sources close to the situation described her reaction as volcanic, precise, fueled. She kept repeating the same line to anyone who would listen: "They won't take what I earned." But here's where the story gets really interesting. The push to examine the Sussex titles wasn't coming from some random palace aide or a bitter courtier. It was coming from Prince William himself. The future king had apparently watched enough of the drama, the Netflix series, the Oprah interview, the constant back and forth, and he was done. Completely done. William had become increasingly protective of the monarchy's stability, and in his view, the Sussex titles had become liabilities rather than honors. He'd been pushing his advisors to seriously look into whether Meghan and Harry should continue holding titles if they weren't upholding any royal duties. To some people, this sounded harsh. To others, it was long overdue. Let's rewind just a bit to understand how this powder keg was building. Meghan had apparently been pushing behind the scenes for more recognition, more visibility, more acknowledgement of her position as a duchess. Even though she hadn't been a working royal for years, people say she'd been insisting that certain brands, media outlets, and even public institutions use her full title, as if it was a required prefix to her identity. This wasn't exactly new behavior, but it was beginning to irritate people in ways that were becoming harder to ignore. Then came the podcast relaunch rumors, the interviews, the red carpets, every public move wrapped in a shiny Duchess Meghan bow, and the palace had finally had enough. What many people don't know is that discussions about the titles had been happening quietly for months. But when those discussions started leaking to insiders, and those insiders started whispering to journalists, everything exploded. Meghan heard that William and several senior advisors were exploring the legal route to strip the Sussexes of their titles. And according to sources, she went ballistic. Not panicked. Furious. Because in her mind, losing the title wasn't just a blow to her pride. It was a blow to her brand, her influence, her leverage in Hollywood, and her ability to command attention. It was the one tether she could still pull whenever she wanted the world to look her way. She demanded calls. She demanded explanations. She reportedly even demanded that Harry do something, as if Harry could march into the palace and stop the future King of England from making a constitutional move. The tension inside their Montecito home became almost unbearable, and then came the threat that nobody saw coming, the one that would turn this private palace drama into a potential constitutional nightmare. To understand why this moment hit so hard, you need to understand what the Duchess title meant to both Meghan and Harry, and why it had become such a flashpoint. When Meghan married into the royal family back in 2018, becoming the Duchess of Sussex wasn't just a ceremonial gesture. It was a transformation. She went from being a working actress with moderate fame to being a global figure, someone whose every move was analyzed, celebrated, and criticized in equal measure. The title gave her weight, authority, a platform she'd never had before. But it came with a price. The racism allegations, the media hounding, the palace coldness that insiders described as suffocating. Meghan endured all of it while carrying that title, and in her mind, that meant she'd earned it 100 times over. It wasn't just given to her through marriage. She'd paid for it with her mental health, her privacy, her relationship with her own family. So when she heard that William was seriously considering stripping it away, it felt like theft. On this particular occasion, what started as quiet constitutional discussions had morphed into something deeply personal. William wasn't thinking about Meghan's feelings or her brand. He was thinking about the institution, about the future, about protecting the monarchy from what he saw as ongoing damage. People close to William described his approach as mechanical, calculated. Every move focused not around feelings, but around the crown's future. And right now, he believed the future was being dragged down by the chaos surrounding the Sussexes. The breaking point seemed to come when Meghan started using the Duchess title more aggressively in her public appearances. Whispers from palace staff suggested frustration was building. Here was someone who'd left royal duties behind, but was still clinging to the prestige the title provided. To William, it felt like having your cake and eating it too. But there was another layer to this story that made everything more complicated. Harry's relationship with the title was completely different from Meghan's. Unlike his wife, Harry didn't see the title as a brand asset or a power move. For him, those royal designations were the last pieces of his old world, the last remnants of the life he walked away from, but never fully let go. The title wasn't about Hollywood deals or public positioning. It was a reminder of his mother, a reminder of the military, a reminder of who he was before everything exploded. Palace insiders described Harry as withdrawn during this period, almost defeated. While Meghan raged and strategized, Harry sat in silence for hours, barely speaking, just processing the idea that the institution he once loved was now considering cutting him off completely. One source said he kept asking the same question late at night. How did we get here? Not in a blaming way, in a defeated one. Even Lilibet's title being dragged into the mix hit him harder than anyone expected. That was the final punch. Back when Harry left royal life, he believed it would lead to peace, a fresh start, freedom. But somehow, every attempt to step away pulled him deeper into conflict, deeper into headlines, deeper into the exact chaos he thought he was escaping. The pattern had been building for years. The Oprah interview where Meghan spoke about feeling suicidal and trapped, the Netflix documentary that peeled back layers of their palace experience, the memoir where Harry detailed family fights and private moments. Each move was meant to give them control over their narrative, but each move also deepened the divide between Harry and his family. And now, William had apparently had enough. He wasn't angry about it, people close to him insisted. He was disappointed. Disappointed that things had gotten this far. Disappointed that the titles themselves had become weapons in a public relations war rather than symbols of service and duty. When word of Meghan's threat to sue reached the palace, William reportedly shook his head in disbelief. Suing the monarchy was unthinkable. It would be like suing the country itself. It would tear apart the already fragile threads connecting Harry to the family. And for William, that wasn't just a problem. It was the final proof that the titles themselves had become liabilities. The internet didn't respond the way Meghan expected. Instead of rallying to her defense, commenters flooded every discussion with one consistent message: she will lose. Not in a vague philosophical sense. in a very practical, legal, constitutional sense. Legal experts started weighing in across social media and news outlets, and they were brutally unanimous. Courts don't interfere with royal titles. They never have. They likely never will. The crown grants them. The crown withdraws them. End of story. Constitutional scholars joined the debate, explaining in clear terms that titles aren't property. They aren't assets you can defend in court. They're privileges granted by the monarchy. And what the crown gives, the crown can take away, especially when the heir to the throne supports it. Thousands of people were saying the same thing across Twitter, forums, and comment sections. She would get laughed out of the courtroom. Others pointed out that suing the monarchy would only strengthen William's case that the titles were creating chaos. Some Brits were brutally blunt, saying stripping the titles would simply clean up a mess that should have been handled years ago. The public reaction was overwhelming, and it wasn't what Meghan's team had anticipated. But while Meghan doubled down, calling contacts in Hollywood, PR advisors, and media allies, Harry was having a completely different experience. He wasn't strategizing or planning counterattacks. He was drowning. Insiders described him as overwhelmed. One evening, while Meghan vented to advisors about legal pathways and public positioning, Harry quietly stepped into the backyard of their Montecito home, sat on the porch steps, and buried his face in his hands. He wasn't thinking about strategy or lawsuits or optics. He was thinking about his mother, about how she would have handled this moment, about how she would have guided him, not as a prince, but as a man. He missed her. In moments like this, the ache was sharp and piercing. The tension inside their home became almost palpable. Meghan's frustration was volcanic. Harry's silence was suffocating. They were two people experiencing the same crisis, but reacting in opposite emotional directions. One was charging forward, the other was pulling back. At one point, Meghan reportedly told Harry, "If we don't stand up for ourselves, they'll walk all over us." And Harry quietly replied, "I'm tired of fighting." That sentence hit differently. Even Meghan paused, because beneath all the noise, all the drama, all the public battles, Harry was reaching his breaking point. Not with Meghan, not with William, not even with the monarchy, with the relentless cycle that had consumed his life for years. He wasn't a strategist or a warrior or a political piece on a royal chessboard. He was a son trying to hold on to the last pieces of his identity, while the world demanded he choose a side he didn't want to pick. Meanwhile, back at the palace, William was pacing across his office floor at Adelaide Cottage, listening to advisors outline the public reaction. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't treat this as a victory. Stripping titles wasn't about winning. It wasn't something he wanted. It was something he believed might be necessary. And necessary decisions rarely feel good. He asked only one question. Will it hurt the children? A pause. A long one. Legally, no. Emotionally, potentially. And that sealed it. If anything went forward, it would be slow, hard-fought, and approached with surgical caution. Not a hit job, not a revenge move. A constitutional measure William believed the monarchy might eventually require. But none of these quiet calculations mattered to Meghan. In her view, the move was a targeted attack, a public humiliation, the ultimate insult. She wasn't thinking about constitutional law. She was thinking about respect, control, image, power. Her team drafted statements, legal letters, contingency plans. She wanted the narrative framed, controlled, shaped in her favor. She wanted the world to see this as injustice, not correction. But even amid all her preparation, one person wasn't fully on board. Harry. He didn't want war. He didn't want lawsuits. He didn't want briefings or PR offensives. He wanted peace. He wanted to protect his kids, not push them into the center of a constitutional earthquake. And most of all, he wanted to stop feeling like he was losing a piece of himself every time another headline hit the What this crisis really revealed wasn't just about titles or palace politics. It exposed something much deeper: the fundamental differences in how Meghan, Harry, and William viewed their positions in this story. Accounts from journalists who covered the situation closely paint a picture of three people trapped in completely different narratives. Meghan saw herself as someone who'd been mistreated, who'd endured racism and institutional coldness, and who deserved to keep the recognition she'd fought for. The title represented validation, proof that her suffering meant something. Harry saw himself as a man caught between two worlds, neither of which felt like home anymore. The title represented his past, his connection to his mother, his identity as a prince who'd once believed in the institution. Losing it meant severing that last connection forever. William saw himself as a future king, protecting an institution that was bigger than any individual. The titles represented responsibility and public trust, and in his view, they'd been turned into tools for personal branding rather than symbols of service. None of them were entirely wrong, and none of them were entirely right. The complete picture that emerged from palace insiders, media sources, and witnesses revealed just how broken the relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family had become. This wasn't a disagreement that could be fixed with a phone call or a family meeting. This was fundamental incompatibility in values, goals, and worldviews. Public reaction showed the deep divide in how people viewed the situation. Some saw Meghan as a woman standing up for herself against an outdated racist institution. Others saw her as someone clinging to privilege while rejecting the responsibilities that came with it. Some saw Harry as a traumatized man trying to protect his family. Others saw him as someone who'd turned his back on duty for personal comfort. The truth, as it often does, lived somewhere in the messy middle. What happened next took months to unfold. The immediate threat of a lawsuit faded as Meghan's legal team likely explained the constitutional reality she was facing. The public conversations about stripping titles continued, but moved more slowly than the initial panic suggested. William didn't rush forward with dramatic action. He waited, watched, calculated. But the damage was done. The relationship between the brothers, already strained, had reached a new low. The aftermath of this crisis showed how deeply the divide had grown. Harry stopped making phone calls to friends in the UK. He avoided conversations about the family. He threw himself into his California life, his charity work, his children. But people close to him described a quiet sadness that never quite left. Meghan continued using her Duchess title in public appearances, but the aggressive push for recognition seemed to soften slightly. Whether that was strategic repositioning or genuine, reflection remains unclear. William moved forward with his royal duties, more determined than ever to modernize and protect the monarchy. But those who knew him well said he carried genuine sadness about how things had unfolded with his brother. The larger implications of this confrontation reached far beyond one family's drama. It raised serious questions about what the monarchy means in the modern world. Can you hold a royal title without performing royal duties? Should personal branding and constitutional responsibility mix? How do ancient traditions adapt to the age of social media and global celebrity? These stories provide insight into the impossible position Harry found himself in, torn between the woman he loved and the family he still cared about. They reveal the fierce determination Meghan brought to defending what she believed was rightfully hers. They show William's cold calculation in protecting an institution he'd one day lead. The idea of losing the title, Harry's title, didn't make him angry. It made him sad. Deeply, profoundly sad. Not because he loved the privilege, but because it symbolized the final severing of ties with the boy he used to be. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin. The boy who saluted military officers during parades. The boy who once believed his place in the family was secure. If the titles were stripped, that boy would be gone forever. As of now, the titles remain. But the threat of losing them changed something fundamental in how the Sussexes viewed their relationship with the palace. It drew a line in the sand that showed just how far William was willing to go to protect the monarchy, and just how fiercely Meghan was willing to fight to hold on to the symbols of her royal connection. In the end, this isn't really a story about titles. It's a story about a man torn between love and legacy, between past and present, between two worlds that refuse to coexist. It's about a woman who believed she'd earned her place and refused to have it taken away quietly. And it's about a future king who made the cold calculation that sometimes protecting the institution means cutting ties with the people you love. No matter what happens next, the scars from this confrontation will last far longer than any title ever could.